Welcome to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice, as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We will relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we chose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.
Our guest today is the bluegrass duo, the Chatham Rabbits. What? You don't know what a Chatham Rabbit is? You'll soon find out. The Chatham Rabbits are the husband and wife team of Austin and Sarah McCumbee, who now hail from Chatham County, North Carolina. That's your first hint about the group name. Though Austin is now an old man in his late 20s, I've known him since he was in about second grade. When my family and I were missionaries in Ukraine, every summer we would come back to the United States, and every summer his family would kindly just clear out the entire upstairs of their house so that we could live there for the entire summer for 7 years. So that was an amazing blessing for us. Our son Carl became a big brother to Austin, and their shared love of music was on constant display during those summers. Sarah is a musical prodigy herself, and when she and Austin met, she was already ensconced in the bluegrass music scene. They've been married for a little over 4 years now. So thanks for joining us by Zoom, Rabbits.
Yeah, we're happy to be here. Everything you said in that intro was just making me smile.
Yeah,
That's
can you
so
like
great.
come to our shows and introduce us all the time? Not everybody does such an eloquent job.
I would do that in a minute. So how about tell us a little bit about growing up, where you each went to college and what your original plan for your careers was.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'll kick things off and then I'll let Austin share. I grew up in the Piedmont of North Carolina and very close to the mill community of Saxby, which at the time was very, very desolate, rural, not very interesting. And, you know, fast forward 15 years and now it's like a very cool, hip, like mini Asheville destination. So it was, like I said, very rural, and it was a really interesting place to grow up. But, you know, we had to drive to get everywhere and like to go see things and do things. But when I was younger in this community of Saxby, they started to have a farmer's market every Saturday in the summer, and they had a lot of old time and bluegrass bands come through. And I just thought that music sounded and looked like the people were having so much fun. So I kind of like always had it in the back of my mind that would be a really fun thing. And I started playing guitar and piano and writing my own songs and being like a very, I don't know, melodramatic preteen.
She called herself Sarah Honeybee, was her stage
that's
name.
my stage, or was my stage name. My nickname growing up was Honeybee, and so I just thought that was like so cool.
Tell them where you played your first show.
Yeah, my first show as Sarah Honeybee was at the Mebane, North Carolina Walgreens grand opening. So
There you go.
Walgreens grand
that
opening.
was a really special time.
It's been downhill ever since, huh?
Yeah.
Exactly.
So the other component to this that I think kind of is interesting to add to the story is that I was homeschooled until I went to college. So I had a lot of freedom and flexibility to kind of go where my interests were. And my parents were very supportive of letting me be weird and like do what I wanted. And they didn't really sign me up or make me do stuff. I just like frolicked in the fields and wrote songs and, you know, and,
Your college.
yeah, and so then I went off to college. I went to Peace College in Raleigh and switched majors a bunch, but ended up studying English and women's studies. And at the same time, I had gotten myself into the old-time string band called the South Carolina Broadcasters. Like I said, I just loved this type of music, and like it looked so fun. And so I started going to their concerts, and I was on the front row at a barbecue restaurant of one of their shows and like was singing along to all the words, and they invited me up on stage to sing. And our voices worked really well together, and so they ended up asking me to join the band. So I went pretty much my whole college career in a full-time touring band, which was really formative experience. I learned a lot really quickly, and went through kind of a painful breakup with the band, but that allowed like me to kind of reset my musical journey and taste and like what I was into. And so that's when we started, or when we met and when we started playing together. There was only like a maybe 2 or 3 month overlap of me being in the band and knowing Austin. When we broke up, it was like,
although when we first met, we didn't play music together for like 2 years, which is
yeah,
wild. A lot of people don't know
I
that.
was just going, I was so upset and sad about being, or leaving, having to leave the band that I was in. And I was like, I'm never playing music again, like this is horrible and blah blah blah. And I just really focused on like starting my job after college and planning our wedding. And once the dust settled and like I got sane again, we started playing more music. So that's my story, but Austin's is interesting.
And before you should also add, before we quit our jobs to play music full time, Sarah was a teacher.
Yeah, absolutely.
For 3 years?
3 years.
3 years, yeah.
Yeah.
At a Montessori school. So that was like her career.
So I was teaching it, and I was loving that, but I was just at that time I was still very emotionally scarred and not wanting to play music myself or like put myself out there in that vulnerable position. And I just wanted to like help other people do it and help kids learn to do it. But that desire to play music and like the fun I was having or had in my former band was always kind of like in the back of my mind a little bit.
Yeah.
So what about you, Austin?
Well, I had like the opposite experience growing up. I grew up in an extremely structured environment where I went to school every day at 7:30 a.m. and played every single sport, was in every single play. There was a lot of there's a lot of routine to my life, unlike Sarah. So we are very different in a lot of ways. Our approach to things, is very different, which I think is one of the reasons why we end up being such good business partners, because her perspective on things is so different than mine, but we also have a lot of similarities as well, which we can get to later. But I grew up in Wilmington, North Carolina as a beach bum. I knew nothing of old time music. And like Mr. Schatzberger said, they would come every summer, and his son Carl and I would play music. Music was just always something I loved. Like I didn't care what instrument I played. I didn't care what band it was. I always played the thing that no one else was playing just so I could play, I figured, okay, if I just learn guitar, then there's only so many opportunities I can get just to play guitar. But if I can play guitar, bass, drums, nobody can tell me I can't play in their band, which is fun. And honestly, Carl was a big part of that because he also kind of dabbled in a lot of different instruments. And so we would write little songs together and things. But I played in the worship band at church. And actually, my very first acoustic guitar was one that you, Mr. Schatzberger, owned at one time, the Washburn.
Oh, my God.
Did you know that?
I did not realize that. That's a great guitar.
Yeah. So we
love that guitar.
Honestly, when Sarah and I first met and the band broke up, this is a little bit of a side note, but she didn't have an acoustic guitar anymore because it was the bands and everything else. And that guitar was in my attic in Wilmington, and it had been for like 10 years, probably more than that. And so I had my dad take it down and get it fully like restored, new string, set up and everything. and Sarah played that like when we first
Yeah,
started
it was
Chatham
so
Rabbits.
cute because Austin's dad doesn't know anything about music, so he was like, all right, I'm gonna go to the Music and Arts Center and like get them to fix it up, and he did great. And I played that guitar like a lot, and yeah.
So anyways, that was a little bit of a side note, but Carl and the Schatzbergers were a big part of that sort of formative time in music. But I did play it at the church worship band, at the school worship band, and but growing up at Myrtle Grove Christian, and then going to NC State, going to Coastal Christian High School, and then NC State. My dad's been a banker his whole life, so I was kind of under the impression that I was going to follow suit in a very financial suit and tie type of role. And so I was a business major. I did minor in art and design, which is interesting. I think I just always had a pull towards the arts. So I did that. It was a great combo. And then I was a financial advisor at a big firm for 3.5 years.
Mm-hmm.
And me and Sarah we were actually happy with what we were doing.
Mm-hmm.
But we decided to take that moments that matter, and and decide to play music full time. And it just happened in such an organic way leading up to that, where we weren't pressuring each other or anything like that. And
yeah, we both kind of came to our own conclusion around the same time. And like Austin said, we were both fairly content with our careers, but it was just like, something is not right here. Like this is not, we're not hitting the nail on the head with what we want to be doing. So.
Awesome. Well, since you happen to mention the Clearness Committee. And since Sarah is from the Quaker tradition, can you, because I think that you are the very first interviewees that we've had who actually have personal experience with the Clearness Committee. And so just to get into that tradition just a little bit, so the listeners really understand a little bit more of what it is that we're talking about, how did that happen for you guys, and what was it like?
So, I am a member of Spring Friends meeting in Snow Camp, North Carolina, and that's where I grew up my entire childhood. Going to meeting, or some people might call it church, but it was always meeting. Yeah. And that's where we decided to get married. And before we actually had the ceremony, and this was probably a couple months before, there was a group of people from my meeting that were members of, there's a Peace and Social Concerns Committee. There's like a grounds committee. There were people that were a part of other clearness committees. And so like delegates from each committee came together, and they sat with us in the meeting house one day before a Sunday or first day service. And they just really asked us questions about what we saw in each other. Like, it got
I
very
had no
deep.
idea what was happening.
Austin, it was like out of left field. Austin thought we were just going to be like, we want like a bouquet and like, somebody to man the guest book.
I thought it was like people from the church, asking what we needed to do to set up for the wedding. Yeah. But
Austin's like, we want buttermints, and they're like, okay, what's your 50-year plan?
Yeah. Are you making enough money? How much are you making?
Right. No, so it was it got very personal, but it was really like the people of the meeting, just like, in a wedding service, they always ask like the congregation, like, are you going to support this couple in their life? And that was essentially for us at that meeting. It was making sure that the meeting was going to meet our needs and vice versa, and that we could, with a clear conscience, because Quakers are all about their conscience, just make that partnership together. And it was really cool for me, because I remember in particular there was a family friend that was in the committee, and I had babysat for her daughter, and she had seen me grow up. And my papa, my dad's dad, I have a ton of family at my meeting, and so my dad's dad was a part of the committee, and he brought a lot of perspective to it. So it was really, I guess I knew going into it what it was going to be, and it was really enlightening, and it made our wedding and our beginning of our marriage feel really good because we had people that were going to back us up, and like we were all on the same page about, and it didn't feel like a surface level, like let's just pick a place to get married. It felt really connected and dedicated.
Yeah.
And in terms of the vocation, change, was that, you said that you kind of realized independently that, something was, not right or whatever. Was that kind of a progressive revelation, or did it kind of suddenly hit you, or what?
So
Yeah,
I
great
think
question.
I never in a million years thought that I could play music for a living. Like I just didn't consider it as an option. And I think Sarah did when she was with the old band, but then when we met and we were both on our career paths, I don't think we ever thought about it. I mean, we played music.
I thought that you could, just as a caveat to what Austin is saying, I believed you could play music for a living, but I thought you would be dirt poor and living out of a box and not have any family or friends. Like my concept of it was like, this is the biggest sacrifice and you will have a terrible quality of life. But that's not true.
Well, yeah, it's not true. But I think we just felt there was a transitioning happening at my firm, and there were some partners that were joining up, and I was sort of getting wrapped up in that potential change. And there was actually another job opportunity that was in Pittsburgh, which is where we lived, which was 40 minutes closer for me. That was really appealing at another firm. And Sarah was wrapping up her school year.
And I did not like my boss. That made
so
it really nice.
Sarah was a little less happy at her job than I was. I was actually thriving at what I was doing. But during that change, I think both of us took the opportunity to stop. And honestly, I think we learned this a lot from Sarah's Quaker upbringing. I've learned to do this. Like when you get in a transitional moment or something, like stop and think and just pause, because nobody ever does that, especially two people like us that can just talk for hours. But the listeners are like, they will not stop talking. But yeah, so I think we took some pause and we're like, okay, our passion is playing music. And we started recording our first album the 8 months before, well, not quite 8 months, but in November. So this would have been like around May of 2018. And so in November, we went into the studio to start recording an album, and just for fun. I mean, just because we love it. And the producer that was working on the album was like, this music is really good. I think you guys should really be sharing this with more people. And he knew what he was talking about because he's worked on a lot of really great records or whatever. So that kind of all these little tiny things sort of started lining up, and then this change started happening. And that's when we actually took time, and I said, Sarah, it's Friday. I don't want my perspective to be influenced by you and vice versa. I want to have some individual clarity on this. So we kind of took the weekend apart, and we said on Sunday we'll come back and we'll share our thoughts with each other, because we had already talked about it together a lot. So Sunday came around, and we both sort of like they do back in like, I don't know, middle school with the Valentine's Day or like prom or something, or the school dance. We were like, all right, check yes or check no type of thing. And we both checked yes. So, but it was that shift in our life that was sort of happening that allowed us to.
There was, for sure. Yeah, there was a shift.
Yeah, and actually mentioning the producer and his reaction to your music, I did want to ask this, because one of the things I really appreciated about your story of, deciding to do music full time, and, is that like out of the box, you guys were writing original music and not doing, much in the way of covers or anything else like that. So how did that happen? How did that collaboration?
That's a really good question. We had just kind of been writing songs separately, and that was like kind of a like a small portion of our everyday life or whatever. But when we were recording this album, we actually there's 10 songs on our first album, and we actually recorded 15. but the other 5 were old time bluegrass covers. And when we were pitching this song to record labels, one in particular, they
Pitching the
said,
album.
or pitching the album to record labels, they were like, we're not going to do this with covers or like songs in the public domain. So that was one reason why we were like, okay, well, we just need to focus on original material. And then we just, out of the gate, we just started playing a ton of shows, and
we played
were
like
getting
110 shows our first year.
Like the first 6 months.
It was insane.
It was insane. And we got a lot of positive feedback. And so it was like, oh, this, it was just positive reinforcement. And people weren't they weren't saying, oh, you did a great cover of blah, blah, blah.
Occasionally someone would scream, wagon wheel.
Yeah, like, no.
We never did that.
But we were just getting such positive reinforcement, or it was positive reinforcement for us to do our original songs. And now that is like the bread and butter of our business.
I think what's cool about our songwriting is that the first album was completely separate. There was no collaboration until we started recording it. There was really 5 songs I had written in my previous life, and 5 songs, Sarah had written in her previous life. And so both of us were fulfilled artistically by writing music before we met, which I think is cool. And this album that we're releasing coming up, our second full-length album, was written entirely together as full-time musicians, and it was much more collaborative. So I think our transition into songwriting and doing original music happened individually, and then we just brought it together. It was already something that was going on in our life, and to me it's the most fulfilling part of playing music. I mean, there's no better gift you can give the world of music than a new song, even if it's a song that we just did a songwriting workshop, and I was just hammering this point home because it's like a new piece of music without you is just never going to exist. And there's a story that we just heard. Gwyneth Paltrow was on a podcast. We love podcasts, by the way. We listen all the time. Gwyneth Paltrow was on a podcast, and she used to be married to Chris Martin from Coldplay, iconic band. And she said one time they were at dinner, and Chris Martin, he was like, I need to leave dinner real quick. I need to go to the piano. And in 15 minutes at dinner, he wrote the song Paradise, which is like, has 1 billion streams, For some people, it was like a life-changing song. So I think, original music is really important, and we just always thought that.
Well, speaking of that, are you guys comfortable with the label bluegrass, or you would prefer old time? You would prefer roots? You would prefer something else?
No, that's a great question, and we get that a lot. We definitely fall under the bluegrass category because of our instrumentation, and we that's definitely those are the festivals that we play and that sort of thing. But we say we're original music that nods to bluegrass and old time traditions, and so we'll take whatever people want to call it: bluegrass, Americana, roots.
People that love bluegrass music hear us and they're like, "This is not bluegrass."
Yeah, but then people that are on the completely folky side, they think this is bluegrass. So we are so fan centered, and we will go with whatever our listeners tell us that we are.
Be sure to tune in next week for part 2 of our interview with Chatham Rabbits.